Is not a bear print.
I say we track this down.
We got a psychopath out here. We got hunting to do.
This is not good.
Can't we just get out of here? Did you hear that?
We are talking Between the Trees, this one by director Brad Douglas. Now this tells the story of Steve. Now Steve is a middle-aged man who is going through some marital problems with his wife. So him and his three kind of best friends decide they're going to go on a hunting trip out in the middle of the woods somewhere. Now Steve may have ulterior motives for going up there, but as they go up there, it's a very kind of remote area. And they kind of have this nice kind of cabin in the woods, as you do in these type of movies. And where they're hunting it, they see signs that there may well be a Sasquatch in the area, large footprints, that sort of thing, no wildlife in the area. So initially we're led to believe this may well be the case. However, they seem to be hunted by something out in the woods that has, it's kind of a violent eye towards them. So obviously what will happen, what is this kind of like mysterious kind of threat that lurks in the woods, and is there a threat lurking within the cabin itself? Well, we'll have to watch the movie to find out. So let's talk Between the Trees. So the first thing that struck me I actually thought the acting right from the outset was very strong in this movie. So I thought everyone kind of got a decent amount of characterization, and you kind of buy into their characters, which is always important for me. I always feel like you kind of need to kind of like understand and to a point care about all the characters that we have. And these four guys are kind of like fairly kind of well defined and seem to kind of like, have their kind of role within the group, but they don't seem to be too outlandish that they wouldn't be kind of friends. So that was all strong. I also like the fact that with we have a movie that focuses on this particular age group. So these guys are probably between sort of 40 and 50. So it's nice to see a movie that has, a kind of, our protagonists are something other than kind of teenagers or young adults, which is quite good. So we kind of go out in the woods, and what's interesting about this movie is there's a potential variety of different things that are kind of set up. It's not always a good thing, but I'll come on to that. So we kind of stop at this kind of local bar, and they seem to kind of rile up some of the kind of the local hick types. There's evidence that there may be a Sasquatch in the woods. There could actually be something like in the realm of the kind of the Wrong Turn or Texas Chainsaw Massacre family, some type of disfigured kind of like people in the woods. And there may well even be some type of viral infection as well. So there's loads of different things, plus something else entirely different. There's all sorts of things going on with this movie. So there's a lot to kind of like digest with this movie in regards to potential kind of like threats and kind of how these guys are going to deal with it. I thought these guys come across very much like kind of real friends. We have the two sort of alpha males and the two sort of beta males who kind of follow them around. Seems like fairly kind of realistic kind of dynamic there, but it doesn't seem kind of it doesn't seem unnatural in any kind of way. Like I've said, I like the performances by the cast here. I thought they all did a pretty good job. When we come to some of the effects, I feel for a lower budget movie, it's not so bad. And there are some fairly kind of graphic kind of deaths here. What doesn't work for me, I feel this movie is a little unfocused about what it is. So I've mentioned there's all these kind of like different kind of potential kind of threats and things that may be going on. Some of these things are just left dangling and kind of never really explained. So we see a character that developed these kind of like these white sort of pustules around his sort of head. It's never touched on again. It's just like, is there some sort of like, there's some kind of like pathogen or contagion within these kind of woods, and it's just kind of there, but it's never really expanded upon, to be honest. I mean, things like that. When threats are revealed, again, we don't really know kind of much about it, and the actual the design of the antagonist, shall we say, in regards to what they are kind of clothed in, doesn't make sense to me, if I'm honest, considering they're wearing white. I'm just saying. So there's a little bit of a problem with the guy, with the kind of the maybe the makeup's okay, and I kind of call up the sound design, but just maybe the aesthetic didn't quite work completely for me. But the main thing for me is it ultimately seems a little pointless. When you kind of watch this movie as a whole, you feel like, okay, it kind of seemed a little pointless. And then we have this surprise narrative that will come up through the movie about a character's ulterior motives. But when it's all said and done, it has literally no effect on the story. The story would have played out exactly the same had this not happened. So it's really kind of pointless for it really even being there. So it seems like, although it's kind of like a little bit of a fun twist, ultimately it's kind of fruitless. And you think, okay, this movie just kind of seems almost a little pointless to a certain degree. Without kind of giving you spoilers, it's hard to tell you why that is. There's also a stinger at the end, which it just goes into these typical kind of like the horror movie stingers that, oh my god, this, oh my god. But it's just the same old. I enjoyed this movie. I thought the characters were strong. It's kind of like Wrong Turn meets Cabin Fever to a lot of degree, but with a hint of kind of like Sasquatch and stuff. It's an interesting premise with believable characters and some quite fun effects. But it's a little bit muddled. The editing isn't fantastic, and like I've said, it just seems when it's all said and done, you feel it kind of is treading water to a certain degree. But it's enjoyable. It's well made. I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.